This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Tom, welcome in this morning, man. Have you gotten cross-eyed with all the different baseball scenarios that could play out for the SEC title this weekend for Arkansas?
Good morning. It's good to be with you guys again. I have not gotten cross-eyed because they're in the top four. You know, they get the bye. I think they're safely in the hosting a regional camp and very, very close to hosting super regional camp. And, yeah, I would rather, you know, Bob's going to cover it for us, so I'm not going. I'll be watching. But, yeah, I'm like you guys. I do not want to be the 4 seed and cover that super night game. Yeah, so that's where I stand.
Yeah. So let me come back. You're being ultra conservative about your approach to a top 8 national seed. You don't think they're in that yet. Tell me why you don't think Arkansas has already proven at this point they're one of the 8 top seeds when the committee makes those selections.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, they probably are. You're in the 90 percentile range probably on that. Yeah, I think they've proven it. But if I'm them, you know, last year it was the Vandy series, the penultimate series that they lost 2 of 3. There was, you know, a rain deal and they won game 2 and then they got shut out. But, and then they lost the series to Bama and then lost to Bama again. And, you know, and they didn't make it to national or top 8 seed. But this year, other than, you know, being swept by Vandy in an ugly fashion and going 0-2, I think they're in there.
Yeah, I think you just gotta win.
And I also don't think that's going to happen either. So if I'm Arkansas right now, there's 3 main priorities to get toward the postseason. Well, and it is to see Jared Wagner and Tavian Josenberger's timing, you know, come back. You could see Josenberger was a little off. I know he drew some walks and he had a hit in the last series, but didn't feel like he's really good at working the count. I bet he's got more 3-2 counts than anybody on the team, him and Diggs. So I want to see him and Wagner, you know, get back in the groove, so to speak. And I want to see one win at least in Nashville, and then I want to know what I want to do with my pitching. And by that, I mean, you know, they had a pretty good thing going with Hunter Holland leading off weekends and Hagen Smith being the flex guy. Well, now that Tiger's back, do you want him to just know that he's starting games and get, you know, progressively more pitches from him? And at his current rate by the regional, maybe he's at 85, 90 pitches. But anyway, it's how do you want to lead off a weekend with Hunter Holland? And I asked Dave that question yesterday, and what I gathered from his response was when you get to the regional, it's about the matchups. You know, it's lefty-righty things, and what that opposing lineup looks like against this style of lefty versus that style, and that's, you know, Smith and Holland. So I think he said they have plenty of time to do what they need to do, meaning, you know, do you want to start a weekend with Smith or do you want to leave him in reserve? So those are, to me, the 3 big priorities heading toward the postseason.
I think Arkansas typically gets bounced by a lefty, so it's nice that you have 2 starting pitchers that are lefties, and maybe that can be one of the things that fans point to for a confident postseason. You're talking about pitching, Tom. So you just listed a couple guys. Hagen Smith, Gage Wood needs to be tossed in there. If you go Hagen, Gage, Brady, Will, and then Hunter, who's that 6th guy? I mean, who are you willing to put a Game 3 super regional? Who are you willing to put that ball in the hands of with those remaining pitchers? Because that's the question I have with this pitching staff.
Well, you can tell that their faith in Cody Adcock right now is pretty good. I mean, I know he didn't pitch last weekend, but I think Cody Adcock's feeling a lot better, and I think the coaching staff feels a lot better about him. I mean, look, Parker Coyle didn't pitch last weekend, and think about what he did against A&M. I believe that was the weekend, and maybe even the following against Mississippi State. My memory is a little blurry on that, but Parker Coyle closed out a game against A&M, and I think he's coming on as well. And here's the thing. I know Bobby and Fouts haven't pitched a ton recently, and then, you know, Bobby had the deal against Georgia, and then Fouts had 2 weekends in a row where he struggled to get anybody out. But as you get deeper on, and even to the College World Series, you will need their innings. And so you want them to be confident, and they'll have to go a little bit deeper in their staff. So my answer to you, I think, would be Adcock, Coyle, that kind of combination.
The answer should be Zach Morris, but he just hadn't played to that level. Based on his experience and time, he's been the guy that should be somewhere in all that mix, but Tommy just hadn't performed to that level.
Yeah, and I left him out. But
he should be left out. He should be.
I mean, the thing is, his last maybe 2 to 3 outings have been better. I mean, you can tell he's just more confident. He got a huge strikeout in his last appearance.
But do you trust him now in the biggest moment?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think there's going to be a moment where they're going to have to trust Zach Morris. What I'd like to do is all those guys I mentioned, I'd like for them to pitch innings in Hoover. And I know
I agree.
Dave Van Horn says it's really hard to win an SEC title. So I think what they're going to do is they're going to try to win 2 of 3 in Nashville. And if you do that, then you've clinched it, at least a tie. And then I think in Hoover, I think it's more about pitching the guys you want as opposed to extending somebody, like, I don't know if I'd want to pitch Gage Wood 3+ innings the way they did to close out Game 1 against South Carolina. I just think I'd save up his innings and get them pointed toward the postseason. And I'd rather Christian Fouch or someone else take some of those innings, or Bybee, to propel toward the postseason and not overwork anybody in Hoover.
So we talked about Jared Wagner a little bit. According to Dave, hey, is he playing this weekend?
Yep.
That was pretty blunt and didn't elaborate on that. But unfortunately, we heard from Peyton Stovall that he is not going to be playing this weekend. We asked you on Tuesday.
Or the rest of the year.
Yeah. What are you going to do with Holt if Stovall comes back? Well, that question's been answered. Holt doesn't have the postseason experience, though, that Stovall had last year. Is that a worry if you're a baseball coach that you had a guy that's been in there and done that, and you're replacing him with a guy that hasn't seen college baseball at this height heading into next weekend and the weekends after?
Well, I would only say mildly, and, there's not a whole lot of numbers on Holt, but he is hitting .333. He was 6 of 10 last weekend, so he's riding a lot of confidence against a really good South Carolina pitching staff. He was one of the few guys who got some, good hits against Mahoney. Mm-hmm. And he's got a home run on the season. He's got a quick bat. And as I documented today in a story, I think he's gone like 18 consecutive games without an error. He's only committed 2 errors on the season. And you know how important defense plays in the Dave Van Horn scheme. So, a fully healthy Peyton Holt, I think right now, was better. I mean, you could see that there was something impacting Stovall's swing in recent weeks. And I know he had a huge home run in the Mississippi State series, but you could see something impacting his swing. And in the A&M series, you remember he dropped a force-out ball at second on a would-be double play, and they got that out, but they weren't able to turn it. And a couple of times when he made throws to first, you could tell he was hurting. His shoulder wasn't right. And one time he completed a throw to first. It was the last out of an inning, and he was screaming into his glove, and it might have been a little frustration that he had dropped that force-out ball, but also I think his shoulder was really hurting him. And he told Matt Jones that he'd go into weekends on like the Friday and his shoulder would be feeling good, and then by the time Sunday came around, it was really hurting him. And so I guess that the tests showed a slight tear in the labrum, so they'll get that thing fixed, and maybe by fall he'll be ready to roll. And Dave was very optimistic that next year Stovall will have a big season.
Tom, Hunter Yurchek is in Hot Springs and Russellville today. He's gotten a lot of questions, one or a couple about the schedule, and he talked about that in Little Rock and in Memphis earlier this week. 8 or 9 game schedule, Missouri for the 8 game, Missouri, Texas, Ole Miss potentially for the 9 game. What is more beneficial for the Arkansas football team moving forward if it's down to those two options?
Well, I think we all know that for Arkansas, personally for Arkansas, playing an 8-game with only Missouri and then rotating the others, and having every SEC team in Fayetteville every 4 years is the most beneficial, because then you're scheduling another non-conference, which you ostensibly should win. But because Nick Saban and some of the other power players in the conference are in favor of the 9-game, I tend to think that that's the one that has the most momentum and is the most likely to be, voted on or approved at the meetings. But either way, I wouldn't mind seeing Ole Miss on the schedule every year. That's a good, border rivalry, and then adding Texas would be fine for Razorbacks fans. And I think it guarantees you to have Texas every year. That's not a bad thing. So either way, that other game would be a tough game for them. So I get the sense that the 9-game is the most likely. But hearing what Hunter Yurachek said on this tour, the 8-game is not as dead in the water as I once thought it would be. So I think it has a chance, but the 9-game seems more likely to me.
Yeah. So to me, you can't even make this decision until you know what ESPN's willing to do in both scenarios. I mean, if I'm one of the presidents of one of these universities who's ultimately deciding on this, it's not the ADs. Yeah. They won't cast the vote that matters. I mean, that's the question that has to be answered. What does our television agreement with our partners look like in either scenario? And I assume they have that information or will have that information before they make that decision. But you've also got to counter that, Tom, with the idea that in an 8-game schedule, I'm going to have 8 home games, 4 on the road in the conference, and I control the rest of them most years. What's that extra home game worth to you on a more frequent basis?
Well, and that's a great point. But I would like to I think the broadcast partners would prefer the 9-game because it gives you another week of, strong inventory versus, Arkansas versus Georgia Southern or, Rice or somebody like that. But, from, bowl eligibility and, overall record, you would prefer the 8-game if you're, Arkansas or South Carolina or really Missouri, Kentucky, a lot of teams in the conference. Yeah.
They may.
Alabama is voting from a position of strength where, their strength of schedule could come into play when you're talking about a playoff scenario. And then you expand the playoffs, that opens things up for more teams, and then maybe the 9-game isn't that big of an impact.
Yeah. I think they start with 9's inevitable. I think we'd all agree 9 is inevitable, whether they start with 8 and go to 9. I think at some point, 4 years from now, 8 years from now, somewhere this deal will expand to 9 games. I think that is a certainty at some point, whether it's now or later. So, Tom, good stuff. Yeah. We'll talk to you Tuesday, and we'll know exactly where Arkansas is playing and what their seat is in the SEC tournament when we visit next.
Yes, we will. Y'all have a great weekend.
All right.
BetOnline.ag is your #1 source for all your basketball info, stats, news, and scores. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest player reports for this year's pro basketball playoffs. BetOnline is always your sports information headquarters this season, as we have you covered for all your sports wagering needs. Basketball, MLB, NHL hockey, right down to UFC and boxing. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way for you to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can play right from your home. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BLEAV. BLEAV. Bet online, where the game starts.